Dr. Tedora Herbosa, he is a well-known figure in the Philippines. He's the founding chair of the ASEAN Collaboration for Trauma and is the first chair from 2012 to 2014. The ASEAN Collaboration for Trauma was developed during our ASEAN Congress, which was held in Bacolod during my term as president of the Philippine Society for the Surgery of Trauma. He was a health secretary of the Philippines from 2010 to 2015. He is currently the chairman of the Philippine College of Surgeons Trauma Injury and Burn Care Commission, led the modernization of public hospitals through health facility enhancement funds and the public-private partnership. He also helped achieve the universal health care coverage. He is a coordinator of foreign medical teams that responded after the Typhoon Haiyan struck in 2013. He has extensive experience in trauma surgery and disaster and emergency medicine. He also started the fellowship program for trauma surgery and the residency training program in emergency medicine at the University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital. He is likewise a professor of emergency medicine at University Kabangsaan in Malaysia from 2007 to 2010 and created the Center for Research in Emergency Medicine. He produced the first batch of Masters of Graduates in Emergency Medicine. He is likewise an international associate for Johns Hopkins Hospital University, implementing the Hospital Preparedness for Emergencies, which is commonly known as the HOPE course, and the peer program, which was funded by the USAID. He's a former board member of the World Association for Disaster and Emergency Medicine and participated in the World Health Organization's Safe Surgery, Save Lives Task Force that developed the WHO Safe Surgery Checklist. He is the current chairman of the Physicians for Peace of the Philippines. He is awarded the Distinguished Public Service Award in 2013 and in 2011 and a 2012 Rotary International Awardee of the Rotary Golden Wheel Award. He is likewise the Executive Vice President of the University of the Philippines System from 2017 to 2021 and is currently a Special Advisor to the Philippine National Interagency Task Force COVID. You will see him often posting pictures of the rollout of all the vaccines in the Philippines and is a professor of emergency medicine and trauma surgery at the UPPGH and faculty of National Telehealth Center at UP Manila. Let's now welcome Dr. Tedora Herbosa, who will give a talk on the order amidst the mayhem and dealing with mass casualties.
I'll be speaking to you about order amidst the mayhem, dealing with mass casualties. First, let me talk to you about our good friend, Professor Vijayan Apasami, a trauma surgeon par excellence. I met him first in an international conference. I did not listen to his talk and his interest in the field of trauma care and what he was doing in ATLS in Singapore. I was also doing the same thing in the beginning, asking for ATLS to be brought to the Philippines as I was part of the Committee on Trauma of the Philippine College of Surgeons. Later on, when we eventually were able to get the Advanced Trauma Life Support and the DSTC in the Philippines, Professor Vijayan was a great help in terms of implementing it, together with my former boss at Chicago, Dr. John Fields, now Dean of the School of Medicine in Nevada, University of Nevada. Professor Vijayan and I worked together eventually when I was sent to take the DSTC course in Tan Tock Seng Hospital, where he was one of the facilitators and faculty. And with that, I joined him as faculty in other places like in Australia and eventually also in the Philippines. So since then, I've known him to be really a very nice person. He's brought me to meet his wife and had dinners with him in my visits to Singapore when they invited me to speak during the Singapore Trauma Conference, which was held annually prior to COVID. If you read about his life, you will see that he has been a great mentor in the field of trauma care. His contribution to Southeast Asia, Singapore, and to Southeast Asia is tremendous. I know my former boss in Malaysia, Associate Dean Ismail, and he's actually met him as well, together with the ATLS courses that were done there in Singapore. And you can see him in valid pictures. He's been a true teacher, mentor, a friend, and an inspiration to all of us. In fact, he died while on duty. He was attending an ATLS meeting in Chicago when he actually passed away. So I'm really honored that tonight we are honoring the spirit of collaboration and passion for trauma embodied by the life and work of Professor Vijayan in the field of trauma care. Let me start off by telling to you my experience in the field of mass casualties and disasters, which had been the characteristic of my interest in the field of trauma education. These are four C's in the disaster world that we all follow strictly. First is the importance of communication in times of chaos. And second is the importance of cooperation with other agencies. This is one field in mass casualties where we cooperate with the security services, with fire, with police, with rescue, with the medical people, and even the different people in the medical field. So it's very important to know how to cooperate with other line agencies in the field of emergency care. The importance of coordination cannot be emphasized, and that's why we have the incident command system, which I will describe in a few minutes, which actually allows different agencies to actually coordinate with other people. Then the last, of course, is collaboration, making sure that everyone who is a stakeholder collaborates in the common goal of achieving the objective of saving more lives in times of a mass casualty. What is a disaster? A disaster is any event in which the number of victims is large enough to overwhelm the resources or the healthcare system, disrupting the normal emergency and healthcare services of that locality. And this is very important. If it's just a regular multiple casualty incident, usually the hospital or the health system is able to surge. And our systems, our plans for mass casualty incident, multiple casualty incidents do come into fore, and we are able to adjust and we are able to surge. But in a disaster, similar to what we've experienced in places in the Philippines, like the Pinatubo eruption, which decreased the global temperature by 2 degrees after the ash cloud circled the world for about a year. Now, very important that we understand the whole context of where mass casualty management comes. And you've got to be able to understand what are the aims of disaster medicine, which covers this field. The aim of disaster medicine is to collect and distribute to the medical staff and the knowledge that loss of life, health, physical and psychosocial suffering as consequences of major emergencies or disasters can be reduced or eliminated. And it requires 3 important principles: a system to be able to mobilize resources, a system to redistribute those resources, and then optimal utilization of those available resources and manpower. These are some photos of our experience in Typhoon Haiyan when you have strong winds and storm surge all hitting an island all at one time. Remember, Typhoon Haiyan was the strongest typhoon to ever hit landfall as far. So the miles per hour of the winds have actually gone beyond the normal parameters of our meteorologists. Now, very important in mass casualty incident management are 3 T's. We've talked about the 4 C's. Now let me talk about the 3 T's. This is mass casualty incidents are times when we in the hospital have to get out of the of our place in our comfort zones, in the emergency room, in the operating room, in the ICU, and we need to get out. We need to go to the field, and we go to the pre-hospital setting or the mass casualty incident site. And there are 3 important things that must happen in that area. The first is triage, a prioritization scheme. The second is treatment of life-threatening injuries and immediate first aid to, let's say, bleeding or immobilization of fractures. And the third T is the transfer to the to the facility, to the appropriate facility where a trauma team can actually give definitive care. So important to understand that the transfer requires deciding whether bringing that person to a nearby hospital or to a farther away medical center where the appropriate diagnostic or definitive care can be given. So let's start with triage. Triage is a medical decision-making process of any emergency. We have day-to-day triage, which is just analyzing the urgency of a particular case. But triage was originally designed by Sir Dominique Larrey of Napoleon Bonaparte's army in the military to be able to prioritize patients based on the severity of their condition, on who can fight again and bandage and be able to fight again in his moving army. Today, we use triage this way by looking at the severity and making sure that those that are severely injured are brought to the hospital and taken care of correctly. And with the proper use of triage, military agencies today, especially the ones in the Middle East where the US forces, British forces, European forces go there, have very low mortalities because of very good triage and making sure that these patients are really transferred to their proper definitive treatment. So what are the common things we use in terms of triage? The very simple thing I teach for medical students is really called START, simple triage and rapid treatment. And I again use three eponyms that people will never forget. You assess RPM. So like in the car, it's the RPM, but it's here. RPM means respiration. So is the patient tachypneic or badypneic? Next is perfusion. Do they have cold, clammy skin? And last is mental status. Are they conscious or are they comatose? So this is very important. So by assessing all three, you can prioritize. Obviously, a person with respiratory difficulties needs to be prioritized. It's priority number one or a red category. If they are okay and they're breathing, then we look at perfusion. If their extremities are pale and they seem to have cold, clammy, they must be in shock or may be suffering from internal bleeding or have had massive blood loss. So they are also priority. And if they have mental disorientation or even comatose, then they are also maybe having severe head injury. So this is very simple and can be taught to our frontline personnel, even our pre-hospital personnel. The other technique that's commonly taught is SAVE, or the secondary assessment of the victim endpoint. This is a system of triage that strives to provide care to those in the field that are most likely to benefit when faced with extremely limited emergency medical resources. So the decisions of a triage officer or incident commander is dependent on survivability. So you look at the people that you feel you can survive and you continue to provide emergency or urgent care for them. However, this doesn't mean you will deny care to those who are moribund or may have very poor chances of survival. You still continue to give them pain relief and other measures to comfort them in their need. This is another photo of Typhoon Haiyan, where the cadavers and the dead far outweigh the people that were affected. So it's a mass. Many of the deceased were lying in the sidewalk, and they were not taken because of the difficulty of the rescue personnel to enter the area because the roads and the airports were blocked. So in SAVE, the victims who will die regardless of the amount of care they receive are also categorized. And that's when, in a mass casualty situation, a person that would have been categorized red may end up being categorized as black. For example, a GCS3 in a mass casualty situation, or a person who undergone a cardiac arrest, post-cardiac arrest, and has some bradypnea. So these are victims that you will need to decide. Even 90% burns in a mass casualty situation may end up in this category. Victims who survive regardless of any treatment measures. So these are the walking wounded. These are people who will be able to live, right? So it's very important to identify these victims. We even talk about asking people to announce yourself. I'm Dr. Herbosa. Anyone who's injured, please follow me. And if they follow you to a certain point, these are your walking wounded. So it's called reverse triage. And then there are victims who will benefit tremendously from limited field intervention, like person with massive hemorrhage can actually be saved. His life can be saved by just a hemostatic agent, a stop the bleed methodology, a tourniquet, or something that can stop massive hemorrhage. And actually, with that intervention, they're already okay. So what are the categories of triage? So we have many classifications of triage. Each system follow their own. Some use the stoplight or the red, yellow, green category, red, yellow, green, black, or white. And then some use prioritization, priority 1, 2, or 3. They are the same, no? Priority 1 or the red category are those that need immediate care. Priority 2, that means they will die within minutes if no intervention is done. Urgent or priority 2 are those that will need care but can be delayed for a few hours. That's the period of delay and without that care, they may also die. So they are called urgent. And last is the non-urgent, maybe a fracture of the arm, wherein even if you splint it, they can wait until the next day to be airlifted to the definitive care. And then there are the non-salvageable patients. This is either the black category, white category in some, or the fourth group we call the non-salvageable patients who are either already dead or dying. I talked about reverse triage earlier, wherein the conditions wherein you have so many injured in a community and the conditions there are for the less wounded are treated and in preference from those that are severely wounded. So if you're in the top of a mountain or a remote island where rescue will take up, you try to concentrate on the people with most likely survivability. And that level of ambition actually changes based on where your location is or your geographic locality and nearness to a definitive care center. In cases of war, when soldiers have to be returned to combat, wherein it's not possible to pass through enemy lines to be able to give care. So these are situations that define the way we triage victims. And medical personnel are victims as well as they facilitate their return to actually go back to duty the following time. So mass casualty incidents actually stretches the resources and capabilities of a hospital or an organization or a health system. It requires the assistance and the cooperation of the entire hospital and health system. So it's like all hands on deck is the usual terminology. So this is a picture of a stampede that happened in a game show that asked people to go to a stadium, a football stadium. And sadly, there was a stampede because somebody announced that there will be no money given, and people started going through the exit, and the exit was ramped up and many people were crushed. And there was a delay because the city at that time had weak emergency medical services, and the game show host did not actually organize any what we call mass gathering event preparation. So it ended up as a mass casualty event, and hundreds died. A nearby hospital was filled up with high priority patients and was overwhelmed as well because of this stampede. More photos of that stampede and the people that were crushed and died because of that. So what is the philosophy in a mass casualty incident response? The philosophy is maximum benefit for maximum numbers. So to save the most number of people, greater good, the right treatment for the right patient at the right time. You follow these principles and you will do well in a chaotic mass casualty incident. This is another incident of a fire along our Manila Bay, where we had to rescue people in the boat and put them in a triage area based on people who jumped and who were injured and who were actually traumatized, psychological trauma. So what are the management concepts for mass casualty incidents? Of course, these things do not happen instantly. You need to prepare. You need to actually train people. You need to drill. So you need to write up a mass casualty incident management plan. The second is review the response. Make sure that your response is coordinated and it is quick and it will arrive in the area immediately. The third is the good implementation of triage. If you are assigned as a triage officer, please withhold treatment. The end point of what your role is is a classification on priority. Let the treatment people assigned there be the one to do their intervention or transfer. Third is the hospital transport and making sure that the right patient is brought to the right hospital and that the first priority patients are evacuated first into the trauma centers. And of course, clearing the patient and making sure that the last patient, each patient undergoes triage and each patient is actually documented. And of course, debriefing the whole team, finding out what worked well and what didn't work so well. This was the Baguio earthquake where many were crushed and trapped in the Hyatt Terraces Baguio Hotel after that severe earthquake. And we used the miners to actually help us extricate the victims from inside. They would create, the miners were good at boring holes underneath, and they used ultrasound and search dogs to find the living that were trapped in triangles of life. So I mentioned about the incident command system because in a mass casualty situation, the police, the fire, the rescue, the volunteers, the relatives, the media will all be going to the incident site. And it is very important that everybody has training in what we call the incident command system. So our Office of Disaster Risk Reduction and Management in the Philippines actually does this kind of training to all the related agencies. So this is a standardized on-scene, all-hazard incident management concept. The incident management system was actually formalized by many of the firefighters in California during the forest fires of California in the 60s and 70s, and eventually evolved and became doable as they organized how they fought these fires. It should be flexible and scalable and must respond, and it must be a framework where everybody follows the same framework, because otherwise people will be arguing and agencies will be fighting each other. It enables multiple agencies to work together. Agencies that probably don't work together on a day-to-day basis will need to work together in a mass casualty incident. And it delivers a standard response and operation of your procedures. So this was the Mayon volcano and the typhoon that hit the Albay region immediately after, causing the downfall of boulders and lahar into communities. And you can see here the buried house where people could have been trapped because of the twin disasters, a volcanic eruption followed immediately by a typhoon. Very similar to what's happening elsewhere. So what are the components of the incident command system? Number one, you need to have a commander. You need to have leadership. You need to have governance. And that will be done by someone who is the one in charge, the overall responsible person for this event. And you will have important sections. And the four main sections are operations, all the tactical activities, which includes police, fire, the medical, the rescue. The planning, which analyze data, especially contingency planning, because not everything, unfortunately, in times of mass casualty, the victims do not follow the plan. In the words of my current boss, a general in the military, said, the first casualty of battle is your plan. Third is logistics. And as I said earlier, the definition of a mass casualty incident is that there are more people in need than the resources available. So it's very important to move the logistics into the facilities and equipment that are going to care for this particular patient. And of course, one will need money and financial movement so that resources can be bought and brought to areas of need. So this is a sample framework. What is important here is that your own organizational setup must fit into this and try to use the current existing framework so that people do not shift jobs. So let the logistics officer be the key logistics person. Let the finance officer be the finance officer, and let the operations chief be the operations chief. So this is important, and you will see that there are other attached agencies like the public information officer that has to deal with the relatives who are looking for lost loved ones, and the media, where you have to give hourly or regular updates. So in the incident command system phase one, it's really about activation, convening the command center, usually activated by the first arriving officer on scene, who will declare that indeed there is a mass casualty incident, confirm the reports, and confirm what are the needs and resources. So it's a damage needs assessment. damage and needs assessment that will be relayed to the command center, and the incident command will actually take responsibility to support the people on the field. The second is really being able to implement all this with coordination, collaboration, and cooperation. To summon all the additional help, identify the treatment areas, assign crews and specific tasks. So if you need to add more people, more doctors, more rescue, more ambulance, this needs to be done. If some people needs to undergo search and rescue, and then making sure that everyone undergoes triage and emergency stabilization and transported to and distributed, not dumped in one hospital, because you will just transfer the mass casualty incident from the scene to the hospital. You must redistribute the resources. You also can't give all the critically ill to just one hospital, because that may also overburden them. And you need to distribute and manage the distribution of cases so that everybody can handle. Give them a little of the critically ill, a little of the moderate of priority 2, and majority of the priority 3. So what are the levels of mass casualty incident? So levels is, I think, to give an idea, the same way we stage cancer or other illnesses, we actually stage the event in terms of level 1 can be managed by a local facility, very much like just an emergency response by the local emergency services. Level 2 is that you will ask the neighboring province or state or resources to actually help you out. And number 3, you'll ask the central government or national government to provide more resources, airlift people, add more manpower, and add more money. And level 4 is really international assistance, wherein the country can no longer support that. I think we have an earthquake that happened just in Haiti a week ago, and it's very important that they need international assistance because of the political and complex emergency situation that they have there. This is a war that happened a couple of years back, wherein the ISIS people invaded a city in our southern island of Mindanao. And there was a real war. We were able to actually retake Marawi, but with the expense of a lot of damage. Then, of course, we have the longest continuing communist terrorist insurgency in the Philippines, 5 decades of insurgency leading to many violations and human rights. With that, I'd like to end with a summary, very important features of what we need to discuss in mass casualty incident, the 4 C's, communications, collaboration, cooperation, coordination, etc. And then the definition of what a disaster is, what are the aims of disaster medicine, what are the levels of mass casualty incident. We talked about the incident command system and its main components, which is operations, planning, logistics, finance, and of course, very important, the concept of triage, which is the first activity that each patient will have by the time response arrives. So it's very important to understand your local health system, what are your capabilities and what are your gaps, and be able to respond. With that, I'd like to thank you all. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much for listening.